Back again today, and I want to pick up where I left off yesterday. Yesterday, I said the debate coach is going to talk about debate, and we're going to pick up there today and continue. Yesterday, I gave you the 4 things that are the focus of a debate, and I gave you 3 reasons why debates were important. And we talked about those, that debates have a purpose, that debates have rules, and that debates have outcomes. And those are 3 things that are really important whenever we talk about a presidential debate or a debate for any public office. Remember those 3 things. That a debate has a purpose. What's the purpose of this debate? And the second thing is, and I really think that purpose ought to be declared prior to the debate, but I don't set the rules. Because number 2 is debates have rules. And so whatever those rules are things that we have to play within. And then the third one is the debate has outcomes. And and there can be some real outcomes come out of debate. So yesterday I mentioned the fact that one of the things that are the 4 topics that have to, or the 4 things that have to be addressed in a debate. I mentioned those 4 things, and they are: it must be topical, it must address inherency, it must address significance, there must be a significant number, and then there must be a significant harm. So those are the 4 things that you need to focus on. I really struggle giving you a definition of inherency because I'm trying to hedge that until today, because I want to talk about a term today that is best understood when we understand what inherency has to do with applied as it applies to a debate. All right, so I'm going to give you some terms today that, because the person who understands and owns the definitions will win the debate. This is true in a sales situation. It's true in a persuasive speech. It's true in a Toastmasters. I don't care what you're doing. If you are in the business of moving people to the next level, whatever that is, and that's what we do every time we have an election. Hopefully we're moving things to a better situation. A debate is intended, high school and college debates are intended to take the status quo and challenge it. And so you have 2 sides. You have one that's defending the way things are, and one that's defending the way things could be. And so you have those 2 things lined up. The great thing about high school debate is they flip-flop. So I have to be on one side 1 hour, the next hour I have to be on the opposite side. That is really beneficial for high school students. It's great for college students. It teaches us to see something from both sides of the issue. The other side's never stupid. Stupid's not an argument. The other side's not even a liar. A lie is not an argument. You have to present evidence to those things. So that's the purpose of a debate. All right, it is to persuade, it's to move, it's to challenge the status quo with something that could be better. Now, the person who owns the definitions owns the debate. Really important that we clarify things. And one of the words I had struggled with yesterday was the word inherency. And I'm going to explain to you why, because the very first word I want to talk about is the word systemic. The best way to describe inherency, and the way I used to describe it to my students, was that when something was systemic, what that means is this, and I think we're throwing this term around. We have this systemic racism. We throw that term around as if it doesn't have a definition, or we can make it up to apply to something. This is what systemic means, and it's really important that you understand the definition, because if I set the definition and I explain what the definition is, then we can begin to address the issue. Okay, so systemic means this as it applies to inherency. Okay, systemic means this. It is that there is a system, a single system that exists, that if there was a change made in that system, there would be a change made in the outcome. Inherency says, it's a perfect definition for systemic. If there is a system, it assumes that there is a system. Now, when you apply that to things like policing, there's not a single system for training police officers, not a single system for much of anything. And this used to be our argument when we would present this in a high school debate, is that the determination was always the federal government. So when you're listening to a federal office debate, like an office of the president, which is the federal office that we get a chance to vote for, when you're listening to that from a federal standpoint, then you have to remember we have 50 states. And so those 50 states all have systems, but the federal government doesn't have a single system. So when you're addressing an issue and you call it systemic, it has to apply to everything inside of that, whatever you're talking about, whether it's law enforcement or if it's education or if it's the administration of welfare benefits or social security benefits. The system itself must be administered from the top down in order for that to be systemic. And then in order to fix it, you have to ensure the fact that there is something in that system that's wrong, that if it changes, it will move the outcome. This is the problem with systemic racism, is that there isn't a system that causes that. It's an internal thing. Now, I'll illustrate it like this. Several years ago, there was a debate topic that had to do with pollution. And one side took the issue of smoking and people throwing their cigarette butts out on the street. And that was a pollution issue. It goes back to, but people want to smoke. And at what point is that part of their inherent right to be able to do that? But they can't throw it out on the street. And so you have, how do you change something that changes behaviors? All right. And that's the challenge that you have when you term something to be systemic. You can't change the system and make it change people's hearts. That's never happened. It's never happened. You can't change the law and expect to have a change in people's hearts. You can't expect to change the law and have a change in people's actions. Want proof of that? I'll show you proof of it. When the federal government came out and said, we want everybody to stay at home, they issued the Safer at Home order, which was executed by the governors of the state. We had a stay-at-home order, safe at home order here in Alabama. I saw that in several other states where you were told by the governor to stay home and to wear a mask when you went out in public. Then we had rioting and looting that went on. Those people were not obeying the stay-at-home order because they thought their cause was bigger. I'm not going to argue the cause. They thought their cause was bigger than the rule. The rule did not change their behavior, so systemic doesn't apply in that situation. That's the value of understanding the definition. The terms make all the difference in the world. Let me give you a few more as we go that'll apply kind of to our world today. Constitutional. Something's not constitutional because I say so. I listened to an argument yesterday between a reporter and somebody from one of the administrations, and the reporter kept saying, but that's allowed for in the Constitution. And she substituted an opinion poll with the Constitution. Just because the Constitution says we the people does not mean that an opinion poll supersedes the Constitution. Doesn't mean that. And she refused to believe that. That's nuts. Constitution, that's the reason why we have a document. That document has things in it that are easy to understand. The purpose of the Supreme Court is to interpret what was meant by those specific things that are outlined in that document. Not an opinion poll, not what people think. And I find it really interesting. Well, I'm not going to go down that road. I'm going to talk about democracy next. One of the things that we've got wrong with our system today, because we do have a system, we have a governmental system. One of the things that's wrong with that governmental system is that we now have it run on pure democracy. It's one of the things wrong with it. Because originally we used to have, when we had 50 senators, or I'm sorry, 100 senators, which we've had for the last 70 years. When we had 100 senators, we had to have 60% of the vote in order to get something passed. Now, what that meant was that when you have, like we have right now, we have 50, 53, 47, then there had to be some negotiation that took place. Then there had to be some give and take. There had to be some back and forth. But along the way, Harry Reid, the Democrat leader years ago, in 2013, decided to do away with that. And we'd make it a simple majority. A simple majority causes nothing to happen. It creates gridlock. They changed the rule in order to get something done. And the problem with that is then you live with the consequences of that. And so now we have a democracy rather than representation. And when you had to have that give and take and both sides had to negotiate and had to come to an agreement, now with a simple majority, we won't have to do that. All we have to do is get one more vote. And that's ugly, and it's been harmful, and it's been dangerous in our society for at least since 2013. The word gridlock is used repeatedly now. And the reason why it's used repeatedly is because the decision made by Harry Reid in order to get a Supreme Court justice approved decided that a simple majority would be better. Remember, those decisions always have long-term consequences. Having to have 60 votes demanded that we have some negotiation, some give and take, some back and forth. Now we don't do that. We only have to win by one vote. Just one vote. And that's all it takes now. Democracies are dangerous. They're dangerous because it doesn't allow for a give and take, which is so necessary for governing to take place. The next one is a causal relationship. We have to I have to mention this because it's so important. Yes, you always have to think about there's consequences that are going to come down the road. I heard a really interesting, I'm going to park here for just a second, come back to causal relationships because of Don's comment. I heard a very interesting comment video by Penn Jillette, who said, let's just assume for a moment that Barack Obama walked on water. This was back in 2013, around the same time when this decision was being made. And he said, let's just assume for a minute that Barack Obama walks on water and every decision that he makes is good and beneficial and valuable. And we grant that kind of power and authority to the president. He's only going to be in office that 4 years. And if there's a re-election, 8. But we grant that authority to him, and we can't get it back. That's the reason why these decisions become so important. That decision that there wouldn't be a 60 vote requirement and only a 51 vote requirement puts us in the very position that the Democrats are throwing an ever-loving fit about today, and they want to add more seats to the Supreme Court rather than understand that elections have consequences. They don't look at the long-term effect. In other words, in the politest Mulford terms I can think of, they don't give a raspatoot about what's going to happen with your kids and your grandkids. That's the sad part of it. So the next one is causal relationship. Very, very important debate term because it's one of the things that you look for when you're looking at topicality, significance, and inherency is you look at causal relationships. And that is this thing over here happened and this thing over here happened. Now, this happened first and then this happened. Are those two related? Are those two related? Is there a causal relationship? Would this thing over here be directly related to the outcome over here? Make sense? So that causal relationship is so important. So important. And if you can connect this thing that happened first to to this thing that happened next, then it's important. Classic example of that. And I was a part of that. So classic example of that. Don mentioned yesterday acid rain. I can remember growing up in high school, and one of our debate topics had to do with this subject of pollution, which seems to get rotated about every decade. And so one of those was pollution, and the topic was acid rain. And we had to do something about acid rain. We had to fix this problem, and the problem was that there was lead in the fuel that people were burning in their car. Okay, so it seemed like the right thing to do was to get rid of the lead. So we created unleaded fuel. So that was the solution, was that we would create unleaded fuel. Now, there was a relationship between lead in fuel and acid rain. There was a relationship between those two. Okay, so we go through the process of getting rid of the unleaded fuel. Now, at that time, there was fuel tanks everywhere. Many of those were buried in the ground, and we discovered that the additive that was put into the fuel to make it burn. And I worked at the oil refinery in McPherson, Kansas, when we switched from that oil refinery from leaded fuel to unleaded fuel. So I got a chance to see this one firsthand. And because of the additive that in order to make the gasoline burns at the same efficiency as the leaded fuel had, the component that was put in that went right straight through the metal and polluted the water. Major water pollution issues followed that quick decision to make sure that we had got rid of the acid rain. So that the causal relationship is really important. Let me get back to it, but it's kind of an interesting story. I have several of those that we've watched over the years that have taken place where a decision was made because there's obvious evidence that this thing here is causing this thing over here. Now, I don't know why that seems so complicated. When you take a look at the cities in America that are struggling the worst, the worst cities in America, where the highest murder rate, the highest crime rate, the highest poverty rate, you can list those, and you can just simply make a list of them. What you discover is that the leadership's all from the same party. Is there a causal relationship? I think the argument could be made that there is. And if there is, then something has to change. Because if you don't make a change, then what happens? But we have to listen to the scientists. Yes, exactly. That was the reason for the acid rain debacle. My best friend, by the way, for about 15 years, was a guy whose job was to inspect the soil after those fuel tanks had the additive go through the sides of them. So he was the scientist that was looking to see how bad the damage was done as a result of that. Causal relationship. This thing over here obviously is connected to this thing over here. And if we can fix this thing over here, then maybe we can begin to fix this thing over here. But when you look at the major cities that are struggling the most, where the murder rate's the highest, the crime rate is the highest, the poverty rate is the highest, the education is the worst. And I read about the functional illiteracy coming out of those cities. It horrifies me because they can't read at a functional level. You know what that means? I can't look at the instructions and know what to do next. What kind of an employee will that person be? Terrible. Terrible. Okay. Causal relationship. I have one more. I'm going to end with this. This is taking more time than I anticipated. But the other thing I want to mention is a model. When we would do a high school or college debate, I would always, out of my debaters, I would always demand that they have a model of success, and in some cases, a model of failure. A model of success, so we can say, yes, this has been tested. It was tested in this local community. We believe that same thing done on the state and federal level may get exactly the same results. Or This happened on the local level. And therefore, we have reason to believe that if you take that action that was taken in this community over here, that you'll have the same thing happen everywhere. Today, we have a really interesting phrase that's been thrown in, and it's a term, and it's this: we have to rethink law enforcement. Now, rethink is not a policy. Just like I told you yesterday that listening to the scientists is not a policy. It's not. I want to know what you think, because I can fire you. Can't fire a scientist. In fact, my tax money is going to pay the scientist. So as long as he can get the grant money, he's going to say whatever is going to be in his best interest to do so. I would give you illustrations of that, except I promise not to. Okay? So those are the things that you look at in a debate. Is there a model? Can you prove to me that this works? Can you give me an example of that? Now, there has to be, again, you have to be able to make that causal relationship. They have to be connected. But do you understand that terms, regardless of whether you're doing this for sales, you're doing it in persuasive speaking, you're doing it in Toastmasters, I don't care where you're doing it at, these things become important. Because if I get to set the terms, and those terms are legitimate and they're real, then I can set the tone of the debate and largely determine the outcome. Thank you for joining me today. I am enjoying talking from an old debate coach's perspective, and I'm enjoying watching your comments as well. So thank you for doing that. I will be on the road next Wednesday. I'll be on the road tomorrow, and so I may not be available. I don't know where I'll be at that time, but if I'm someplace where I can get Wi-Fi or get connected, I may try to go live and pick up where we left off here today. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to talking to you, if I can, from the road tomorrow.